Another crack in OPEC. That story is next. First, damage control in the White House steps up. Reid Collins has more from Washington. Good morning, Reid.
Morning, Bill. Sources say President Reagan's planning to meet with a number of longtime friends and advisors tonight. This strategy session, part of Mr. Reagan's attempts to deal with the Tower Commission's report and with the future of Donald Reagan. The next few days are considered crucial for the president. The New York Times saying White House officials are urging him to move decisively and show he still is in control despite the Iran-Contra affair. The president's reportedly considering a nationalized televised speech Wednesday to discuss the Tower report and his response to it. The first real casualty of the report could be the Chief of Staff, Donald Reagan. Two possible replacements, the former Nevada Senator Paul Laxalt, former Transportation Secretary Drew Lewis, both have said they're not interested. Other possibilities include the Treasury Secretary James Baker, again, Energy Secretary John Harrington, and the Ambassador Charles Price. Movement toward a Middle East peace conference is reported after some meetings between Israel's foreign minister and the president of Egypt in Cairo. A joint statement out this morning says agreement was reached on the need for an international conference this year to expedite the Middle East peace effort. A bomb threat forced a British Airways Boeing 747 to land in Los Angeles last night and evacuate all 384 people on board. No bomb was found, but 6 people were hurt getting off the plane. The craft was flying from San Francisco to London when somebody called the bomb threat to the British Airways offices. And that's it from here, Bill.
Thanks, Reid. More pressure is building on OPEC. Ecuador, a member of the cartel, is asking official permission to cut the price of its crude 52 cents.
Substitute thrifty. When you need a car for a special occasion, see your phone book for the thrifty location nearest you.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
The Tower report makes headlines around the world, tailored to fit the editorial will of the press's owners. Meanwhile, the White House prepares to write some headlines of its own.
This is Daybreak on CNN for Friday, February 27th. With Reid Collins in Washington and Donna, Kelley, and Brian Nelson in Atlanta.
Good morning. The White House is preparing its response to the Tower report with a strategy session tonight and a presidential speech to the nation next week. Now, someplace in between these events, it's believed there'll be a job posted on the bulletin board. CNN's Frances Hardin's at the White House this morning. Frances, what's going on in there today?
Good morning, Reid. The president will meet this evening and tomorrow with some trusted friends and advisors. Among those scheduled to be in on the meetings are Paul Laxalt, the former senator from Nevada, Charles Price, the U.S. ambassador to Great Britain, Stuart Spencer, an old California friend, and about a dozen others. Tonight's meeting is scheduled to be a crucial strategy session. One important topic is choosing a new chief of staff. However, Laxalt has withdrawn his name because he wants to run for president. Drew Lewis, the former Transportation Secretary, is said not to be interested because he has only recently moved his family to New York. And Treasury Secretary Jim Baker is also said to be not interested. Of the names that have been floated, that leaves Energy Secretary John Harrington and also Charles Price. An ironic player in all of this is current Chief of Staff Donald Reagan. He is said to be in on the meetings and also will play a role in choosing his successor. Another important item on Mr. Reagan's agenda is a speech to the nation next week. With more on that, here is CNN senior White House correspondent Charles Bierbauer.
The short-term goal is to get the presidency back on the track.
Next week, I will address the nation and give the American people my response to this report.
The objective is a speech low on rhetoric, just a chance to talk with the people. As one White House official puts it, one chance to get it right. The long-term goal is to show that the presidency still runs. In Congress, some think it can.
Well, I think the president can recover after all the rest of the business of government goes on. So I don't see this as a lost presidency.
But it's like a family fight. We're now going to spend the next 4 months beating on ourselves and beating on the president and finishing it up.
Even the Tower Board doubts the president can change his management style, so a lot will depend on the staff the president gathers for his last 2 years and their ability to make a lean end-of-term agenda look meaty. Major staff changes seem certain, and if there is any joy in this, it is among conservatives who think they may regain some of the access they lost when Donald Regan guarded the Oval Office door. White House advisors can hardly wait until the president gets back on the road again in late March, and some want him to get tough with Congress, wielding his veto pen and battling the budget. But any recovery may be only partial.
It is going to be very difficult for this president, in fact, I think impossible ever to go back up on top of the mountain that he was on.
The peaks of the Reagan presidency may well be past. First Lady Nancy Reagan has called the Iran affair a valley in her husband's administration. Now she says the Tower report puts things on a plateau from which he can move forward. The question remains, can he? Charles Bierbauer, CNN, the White House.
The Tower report sparked plenty of advice from the Senate for the president. Senator Sam Nunn, a Democrat, wants the president to get into the middle of things, and Senator Paul Tribble, a Republican, wants the president to put things behind him.
He has to be more involved. It's not simply the Iranian matter. It's a matter of arms control. It's a matter of national security decisions. It's a matter of foreign policy. It's a matter, I'm sure, in many cases of domestic policy. You can't have different players running all over town saying different things about very important matters and have a coherent foreign policy. The president has to be the referee, and he has to make decisions, and I think that has not been done to the extent that it has to be done in the future.
This is not a Watergate situation. There's no evidence whatsoever that there was any criminal misconduct on the part of the president. We heard John Tower say there was no evidence he knew about the transfer of dollars to the Contras. So perhaps we can begin moving ahead.
The Tower report says the fired National Security Council aide, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, made up stories about meetings with the president that never took place. At one point, his former boss, Robert McFarland, wrote a letter to the then National Security Advisor, John Poindexter, saying the pressures of the job were getting to North and he might need hospitalization. Donald Regan isn't the only one who may have employment problems because of yesterday's document. Robert Gates could have some problems getting Senate approval to head the CIA.
I think the Gates confirmation is a bad one, ought to be withdrawn.
The majority leader of the Senate, Robert Byrd of West Virginia, also said yesterday the Senate's not going to act in haste on that Gates nomination.
Almost 6 minutes after the hour. The Tower Commission report touched off a wave of official relief in Israel. There had been fears in Jerusalem that Israel would be made a scapegoat. Israel made 5 shipments of arms to Iran at the request of the White House. But Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir says the report shows clearly that the arms deal was an internal American affair. But newspaper editorials in Europe reflect harsh judgments from other U.S. allies. In Britain, the stately London Times speaks of a confusion of means and ends that would shame any constitutional government. The prestigious Manchester Guardian put it tersely, the verdict was a novel one, guilty but asleep.
In the wake of the Tower Commission report, the House and Senate Select Committees on the Iran arms deal continue to press forward. Senate Committee Counsel Arthur Lyman says his panel will seek a court order to get into secret Swiss bank accounts used in the transaction. The order would compel retired Air Force Major General Richard Secord to waive his secrecy rights under Swiss banking laws. Secord runs a California company that's been involved in supplying the Contras. He is said to have control of a Swiss account in which some of the Iran arms money was deposited.
7 minutes after the hour, looking ahead for the weekend to see what it will be like with the weather. Valerie Voss. Valerie?
Thank you, Donna. We're looking at some very rainy weather across a lot of the southeast. Right now, the rain stretch all the way from Texas over to the Carolinas, where some of that precipitation is freezing in the mountains and foothills of North Carolina, Virginia, and West Virginia. Travel advisories in effect that way. A winter storm warning just issued for the mountains of North Carolina. Could be 3 or 4 inches of rain easily across parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia today. Thunderstorms a good possibility, and out in the colder air as it pushes down across the plains, snow in the forecast. Already a foot of snow on the ground at Chadron, Nebraska. Winter storm watches and warnings and travel advisories in effect across the central part of the nation today. Showers in the forecast across parts of western.
Everybody else. One-on-One, Sunday at 7:10 p.m. Eastern on CNN.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Day Watch on CNN for Friday, February 27th. With Reid Collins in Washington, Marianne Loughlin and Bob Cain in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. President Reagan begins his damage repair efforts in the White House today to deal with the Tower Commission report, highly critical of his Iran arms policy and those who implemented it. The next few days considered crucial for the president as he's facing a number of important decisions. CNN's Francis Hardin's at the White House right now to discuss what these next few days do have in store. Francis?
Reid, Mr. Reagan is turning to trusted friends for advice on how to get his presidential house back in order. Today and tomorrow, the president is scheduled to meet with a number of people, including former Senator Paul Laxalt, Charles Price, the U.S. ambassador to Great Britain, Stuart Spencer, an old California friend, and about a dozen others. One goal is to choose a new chief of staff, but equally important is planning what to say to the nation.
I want to make it clear that I consider their work far too important for instant analysis. I intend to read and digest it first, think carefully about its findings, and promptly act on its recommendations. Next week, I will address the nation and give the American people my response to this report.
According to one official, the speech that the president will give next week will be one chance to get it right. It is expected to be low on rhetoric that might turn people off. The idea is simply to let the president talk to the nation. And live at the White House.
As was mentioned, the Tower Commission's report has apparently sealed the fate of the White House Chief of Staff, Donald Regan. Numerous reports say now he's already been given his walking papers. Possible replacements to include the Energy Secretary John Harrington, described as capable and anxious, not necessarily though willing to become part of a team approach, which now is expected for the management of the White House. Charles Price currently is the U.S. ambassador to England, and he is to dine with the president over the weekend. The former Nevada Senator Paul Laxalt already reportedly has turned the job down, says he might run for the presidency in 1988. The former Transportation Secretary Drew Lewis says he's too busy at his new post with Union Pacific. A former White House staffer, now the Secretary of Treasury, James Baker, also is mentioned, but he is described as not too eager for this because he had that job before.
Israeli officials say the Tower report places the blame for the Iran-Contra affair on the United States. They're expressing relief that it doesn't make Israel a scapegoat. A spokesman for Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir says the report shows the Iran arms deals were, quote, mostly an internal American matter. But the Tower report indicates the White House wanted to make Israel a scapegoat. Former National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane told the panel that the White House tried to shift the blame to Israel once the Iran arms policy collapsed.
The Soviet news agency TASS calls the Tower Commission report an attempt to whitewash President Reagan. TASS says the report tries to cover up the president's role in the affair. Reaction throughout Europe is also critical of the Reagan administration. Correspondent John Donvan reports from London.
Nearly all the London newspapers wrote up the Tower Commission report as an indictment of Ronald Reagan's foreign policy and management skills. The verdict is guilty but asleep, writes The Guardian, while The Independent speaks of a black day for President Reagan. And here in Europe, as in Washington, there's a sense that more is to come.
The detail is still to come, and there is considerable concern that that may be further damaging, perhaps not only to the United States administration, but perhaps to some other allies.
Britain's Prime Minister Thatcher may be in a difficult position. So closely has she allied herself with President Reagan, her opponents are already mixing the Tower report into British politics.
My own feeling is that it has shown the shallowness of some of her foreign policy judgments, the way that she has consistently tied herself to President Reagan.
While this member of Thatcher's own party thinks it's best not to say too much.
We have far more to lose than to gain by seeking to undermine or vilify a president of the United States.
Much of the French press concludes that Reagan's credibility has suffered possibly permanent damage. Some French already are eulogizing the Reagan administration, whose officials were seen, if nothing else, to be sure of themselves.
They are losing that image of confidence and strength.
Communist spokesmen were more aggressive, the Soviets saying that the Tower Commission had shielded President Reagan from blame, not a view shared by most of Western Europe. Most of the time, Europeans seem to love taking potshots at President Reagan, particularly when he's made mistakes. But this time, the sense of negative consequences for everybody seems to be making the potshotters think twice. John Donvan, CNN, London.
A Syrian ultimatum to warring Lebanese militias. The Syrian army has issued a final warning to the militias to free all Lebanese civilians captured during last week's fighting. 7,000-man Syrian force moved into West Beirut last weekend to quell factional fighting. Syria's chief of intelligence, Ghazi Kernell, is promising severe punishment if the Lebanese captives are not set free at once. But he said there is little that he can do to gain the release of 26 foreign hostages, including 8 Americans. Kernell says one of the foreign hostages is being held in territory under Syrian control. It was a more peaceful scene in Cairo, where Israeli and Egyptian leaders today announced an agreement on the need for an international peace conference on the Middle East. As part of the agreement, the conference would lead to direct Israeli-Arab negotiations. The announcement came during a 3-day visit to Egypt by Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres. Peres met twice with Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak to discuss Middle East peace efforts. The chief disagreement between the two sides concerns the Palestinians and who should represent them at the international conference.
The big storm that has been dumping snow on the Rockies all week has finally begun to move. Mountain areas of New Mexico got nearly 2 feet of new snow yesterday, and more is expected today. At Los Alamos, New Mexico, just under 11 feet of snow has fallen this winter. That's a new record. National Guard helicopters will be sent today to check on Hopi Indian families isolated by the snow. The National Weather Service says the worst is over for the far west. The storm is headed east into the plains. Valerie Voss will have more on the weather for us in just a few minutes.
She was known as the Black Widow, Audrey Marie Hilley, sent to prison for life for killing her first husband and trying to kill her teenage daughter. For 4 years, she had avoided capture, lived under an assumed name, even faked her own death, and posed for a while as her own sister. The Black Widow got a 3-day pass out of prison last weekend. She disappeared. Police found Audrey Marie Hilley yesterday, muddy, wet, and incoherent, on the porch of a house near Anniston, Alabama. Within hours, she was dead. Authorities tentatively have listed the cause as hypothermia and exposure. One official familiar with her said, "What an anticlimax."
In Georgia, a man whose 3 pit bull dogs killed a 4-year-old boy has been convicted of involuntary manslaughter. Hayward Turnipseed was sentenced to 5 years in prison and another 5 years on probation for the death of a boy whose spine was severed twice during an attack in November. Authorities said Turnipseed had been warned repeatedly to keep his dogs locked up. The fatal attack occurred when the dogs got out of Turnipseed's house while their owner was away from home. In California, a judge dismissed charges against a woman accused of contributing to the death of her baby by failing to take proper care of herself during pregnancy. Pamela Ray Stewart's baby lived only 5 weeks after being born with severe disabilities. Prosecutors had charged that Stewart used drugs, disobeyed her doctor's orders, and failed to seek adequate medical treatment while she was pregnant. Civil libertarians hailed the verdict, and the prosecution, though, says it may appeal.
Police in Paterson, New Jersey have arrested 2 women they say lured young girls into a prostitution ring whose clients paid for sex with the drug crack. The women, Tammy Thomas and Gloria Walton, are being held for $75,000 bail each. They were arrested when a 12-year-old girl told police she was beaten after returning from a prostitution job without the crack. Police say the children got about 2 vials of crack for each job, which they then smoked with Thomas and Walton. Authorities are searching for at least 6 more minors who may have been in the drugs for sex ring. The Baby M custody battle resumes this morning in New Jersey. Yesterday, a psychiatrist testified that Baby M could face emotional problems when she learns her birth was the result of a surrogate mothering contract. Dr. Stephen Nickman took the stand as a so-called hypothetical witness, testifying for neither side. The doctor said there are risks when a surrogate baby is taken away from its mother.
It could be that the child would feel rootless, not grounded in his or her life, and would feel that she had been rejected.
The doctor went on to say that the sooner the baby is placed in a permanent home, the fewer the risks. Baby M is currently living with the family of her biological father. The judge's decision on which family will get custody is not expected for several days.
Now nearly 10 minutes past the hour. If you are a smoker, trying to find a way to quit.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Day Watch on CNN for Friday, February 27th. With Reid Collins in Washington, Donna Kelley and Brian Nelson in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. This is T+1, the day after the Tower report hit the streets in the White House and Pennsylvania Avenue. And let's find out what they're saying about it on this day after and go to CNN senior White House correspondent Charles Bierbauer, who has the latest. Good morning, Charles.
Good morning, Reid. White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater said the president yesterday began reading through that lengthy report from the Tower Board, and Mr. Fitzwater describes the president this morning as rightfully angry about the Tower report's description of mismanagement in the Reagan administration. He said that the president intends to make changes as soon as possible. Presumably those would be both changes in personnel and changes in style around here. When asked, though, what the president was angry about, Mr. Fitzwater was not quite as precise. He said that there are many new facts in the report that were not known around here before. He was asked how the president feels about Marine Colonel Oliver North and Admiral Poindexter, the former national security advisor. The president at one point had described Ollie North as a national hero. Today, Mr. Fitzwater said the president still has the same position about those two gentlemen's constitutional rights, but he is not sure that his attitude about the two individuals remains the same. And what about his own management, which is so severely criticized as being aloof, distant, uninvolved in that Tower report? The spokesman for the president said it's part of the report. It's certain to be part of the president's review of it. Then there's the question about staff changes. Chief of Staff Donald Regan, much rumored to be on his way out. Mr. Fitzwater said that the president still intends to talk to Mr. Regan and make a decision and or an announcement on that next week, although certainly the discussions have been going on. He confirmed that the president has discussed the matter with two of the people mentioned as candidates for the job. One is former Secretary of Transportation, now the head of Union Pacific Corporation, Drew Lewis, and the other is former Nevada Senator Paul Laxalt, a close friend of the president's. Both of them have reportedly told the president that they just can't do the job on a full-time basis, though they're certainly willing to help him make a transition. Finally, the question of just where the president goes and whom he is consulting. He has talked with almost a dozen congressmen on the phone. He has the Republican leadership, Senator Dole, Congressman Michel, and several others coming in to see him this morning. But probably the key meeting, Reid, will be this evening, when some of the president's old friends and advisors, including California political consultant Stu Spencer, Senator Laxalt, possibly as many as a dozen people will be at the White House, and certainly probably his most key advisor, First Lady Nancy Reagan, and the discussion then will be on how to get the president out of this mess and moving forward. Reid?
Thank you. That's Charles Bierbauer live with the latest from the White House. The international reaction to the Tower panel findings is now pouring in. In a report monitored on Cyprus, the Speaker of Iran's parliament, Rafsanjani, is quoted as saying his nation is happy and proud of the Tower findings. In Britain, one newspaper, The Guardian, a liberal newspaper, summarized the report by saying the verdict is a novel one, guilty but asleep. Another British newspaper, The Times, says the Tower panel presented a thorough indictment of President Reagan's conduct of foreign policy in his second term. Some British observers feel there's more to come on the Iran affair.
The detail is still to come, and there is considerable concern that that may be further damaging, perhaps not only to the United States administration, but perhaps to some other allies.
Meanwhile, the French press concludes that President Reagan's credibility has suffered some severe damage, and the Soviets are saying the Tower Commission had shielded President Reagan from blame. Well, in Israel today, officials expressed their relief the report does not make Israel the scapegoat. A spokesman for Prime Minister Shamir says the report shows the Iran arms deals were mostly an internal and American affair. Israel says it will provide some more information to the investigators who still are probing the Iran affair.
4.5 minutes after the hour, Nicaraguan rebel leaders, the people thought to have benefited from the diversion of Iran arms money, watched the Tower Commission on television yesterday They say the adverse publicity is hurting the Contra cause. CNN's John Zarella reports from Miami.
Contra leaders Arturo Cruz and Alfonso Robello took time out from meetings to watch the broadcast of the Tower Commission report. The two members of the Unified Nicaraguan Opposition, or UNO, say that the publicity surrounding the Iran-Contra affair is hurting their cause. But they maintain that it is not their fault if U.S. government officials didn't follow the letter of the law and diverted illegally obtained funds to their struggle.
It is the obligation of the American officials who have a relationship with God to make sure, that whatever they pass on to our side for our struggle, for whatever purpose within the struggle, is legitimate. Why should any one of us question somebody like Mr. Oliver North in the White House?
Cruz and Robello say they were never called to testify before the Tower Commission, but acknowledged they gave testimony to the independent counsel. Cruz said he opened all of UNO's financial records for review.
I corroborated to them 2 or 3 weeks ago when I met with them, my relationship with Oliver North, the fact that we have made arrangements for the transfer of taxable amount on a monthly basis, and that it was from foreign private donors.
After watching the Tower Commission briefing, both Contra leaders expressed a bit of pessimism about whether UNO would succeed in its fight with Nicaragua.
A totalitarian cancer in Central America cannot live with a democratic Costa Rica and a democratic Honduras. So this is not a matter that is going to end because we may have no hope.
Much of their hope depends on the U.S. Congress's willingness to continue funding their war efforts. Hoping to regain the confidence of Congress and the American public, the Contra leaders announced that by May 31st, they will have a completely unified front, one army and one central financial system, all under civilian leadership. John Zarella, CNN, Miami.
The failure of the Arms for Hostages policy, which has brought the Reagan administration its greatest crisis, is also bringing despair. Some relatives of the hostages now see no chance of any new initiative to win their freedom. Peggy Say, the sister of hostage Terry Anderson, says, and I quote, "Now we have nothing." Anderson is the Beirut bureau chief for the Associated Press. He was kidnapped almost 2 years ago. The Syrians say they are going to do something to get the hostages free. Syrian troops are completing their occupation of the Muslim quarters of Beirut. Most of the armed militias have now left the city. The head of the Syrian forces in that city was quoted as issuing an ultimatum to the hostage takers. And from Damascus, there is a report that Syria has formulated a plan to get the hostages free. How and when this plan will go into operation is not yet known.
The cost of living took a bigger bite out of American paychecks last month. The Labor Department reports inflation in January took its biggest monthly jump in nearly 5 years, pushing up the consumer price index by 0.7%. The increase was spurred by a sharp rise in energy costs. And American exports remained sluggish in January. The Commerce Department says the U.S. trade deficit grew to $14.8 billion last month, about average for the past year. U.S. exports in January fell to their lowest level in 3 years. And, of course, we'll have a complete business report at 1:30.
In our World Watch today, South African police are not commenting on a raid this morning on the home of anti-apartheid leader Winnie Mandela. A daughter of Winnie and Nelson Mandela was detained briefly. There are unconfirmed reports a gun was found in the house and that shots were fired. It is the second time in a month that Mandela's home has been raided. In the Philippines, a panel is recommending criminal charges be filed against both sides in a bloody demonstration last month. 12 people were killed, 74 hurt when soldiers and police opened fire on a group of demonstrators in Manila. A 3-member panel appointed to investigate the incident says the troops fired unnecessarily, but it also blames the leftist leader of the rally and his supporters for allegedly inciting the violence.
In London today, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Runcie, will ordain 15 women deacons. It's a rank just below priesthood, and there are those within the church who hope it will eventually lead to the ordination of women priests. The foundation for that was laid yesterday when the church's General Synod, or Parliament, approved a report setting out the steps needed to phase women into the priesthood. That alarmed opponents who threatened to form a breakaway church without women priests. But Archbishop Runcie, who supports the idea of women priests, says there is no cause for alarm. He says it will be at least 5 years before women priests are ordained.
It's therefore a little early, I think, to be taking the tarpaulin off the lifeboats.
The church hopes to eventually ordain 700 women deacons, and they will be called reverend and may carry out most priestly functions. The Vatican says it is astonished at the indictment of Vatican Bank President Paul Marcinkus. Italian authorities have issued an arrest warrant for the American Archbishop in connection with the 1982 collapse of Banco Ambrosiano, Italy's largest private bank. However, the Vatican says that Marcinkus is immune from prosecution. More on that now from CNN's Jim Clancy.
Archbishop Paul Marcinkus is being sought on an arrest warrant charging him as an accessory to fraudulent bankruptcy. The one-time advance man for Pope John Paul II was and still is president of the Vatican Bank. The bank was involved in a number of deals with Italian financier Roberto Calvi, whose financial empire crumbled in 1982, leaving behind more than $1 billion in unpaid debt. Calvi apparently committed suicide in 1984, but police have not ruled out the possibility he was murdered. Prosecutors allege the American-born archbishop helped prop up Calvi's empire through actions he took as president of the Vatican Bank. Archbishop Marcinkus cannot be served with the arrest warrant as long as he remains behind the walls of the Vatican, but the case against him could be brought to trial anyway. A friend of the Archbishop described him as shocked that after almost 5 years of investigation, police suddenly issued a warrant for his arrest. The Vatican Bank already paid $250 million to some of the creditors who lost money when Calvi's Banco Ambrosiano went under. Throughout, the Archbishop and official Vatican spokesman have denied any wrongdoing. Jim Clancy, CNN, Rome.
As of today, it is illegal to advertise snuff and chewing tobacco on television and radio, and all smokeless tobacco products packaged from now on must carry warnings similar to those found on cigarettes. Congress acted to regulate smokeless tobacco products amid growing concern over evidence linking snuff and chewing tobacco with cancer.
Athletes made it popular chewing and spitting, and that popularity grew with youngsters. But in some cases, so did health problems, including mouth and throat cancer and nicotine addiction, according to the National Institutes of Health. Studies show that at least 10 million Americans use smokeless tobacco, with 3 million being under 21 years old. Because of the growing medical concerns, the Federal Trade Commission ordered warnings. One of these 3 will be on packages of smokeless tobacco starting today. They will be alternated on a random basis. Warning, this product may cause mouth cancer. Warning, this product may cause gum disease and tooth loss. Warning, this product is not a safe alternative to cigarettes. The concern over smokeless tobacco received national attention last May in Oklahoma when Betty Marcy sued U.S. Tobacco Company for $147 million. She claimed the manufacturer was responsible for the cancer death of her 19-year-old son, Sean. He chewed Copenhagen brand snuff for 6 years. The company won the suit in federal court. Besides the warnings, a ban on radio and television advertising for smokeless tobacco is in effect today. The bans and warnings are similar to those for cigarettes.
We have this update just in today. Watch from Paris through the Associated Press. A French prosecutor has asked for a sentence of 10 years or less in the trial of a suspected Lebanese terrorist. The defendant, George Ibrahim Abdallah, is charged with complicity in the murders of an American and an Israeli diplomat and in the attempted murder of another American diplomat. A verdict in the trial is expected by tomorrow. Let's go now to Washington.
I think he's willing to accept responsibility. He will be making a speech to the American people.
This, of course, is Robert Dole describing a conversation just held with the president.
Midweek next week, and I think, quite frankly, from my assessment of the president, he really feels deeply about the critical nature of that report, but accepts it, and he's going to come right out forward and say that
Has he selected a new chief of staff, Mr. Michael? Has he selected a new chief of staff, do you think?
We gave him some ideas and some thoughts. And, well, there's obviously have to be some changes made, and we've got to regroup here and surge forward. And that means No, Donna.
What do you think of Reagan hanging in the way he has, Congressman Michael?
Well, there are some things that had to be put together. Let's face it, the budget is up there. It's up there earlier than it ever has been. We've had a competitive package. We've got the catastrophic health package. And some of those things have come forward, and they would not have come forward had it not, at least for somebody, being shepherding something up to us. Now,
the president is angry. The phrase his spokesman used was, rightfully.
Well, I think he wants to move forward. I think the president feels that there may be a perception out there with some that he's not in charge, that he hasn't, nothing's been happening down there. As Bob just said, there have been 4 or 5 major initiatives this year, even during all this investigation. I think the important thing is the president asked for the Tower Commission. He asked for the truth. It's out. There'll be other matters, I assume, will be explored by the Select Committee. There will be a new chief of staff. We don't know who it's going to be or when it's going to be announced. There may be other changes.
Did you talk about cabinet changes?
Al? Well, I think that was a clear emphasis I had.
Well, Got any ideas? Senator, did he say anything about Schultz or Weinberger or a larger shakeup? Did
No,
he recommend a larger shakeup?
Al, do you want to speak to that?
Well,
Senator, come to the microphone.
No, we discussed...
These are not deathless words. We talked about the entire spectrum of the relationship with Congress. Congress is working hard. The committees are meeting. We have a country to run, and I've said that before. And in a month, we're going to have a full agenda. Got to be a new outreach with the Democrats. I haven't been too used to that in the past. It's going to be very important to do that. We talked about persons. We talked about the reservoir of people who can assist him in this extremity, and there are just a lot of names.
Well, we've been turned down, we understand, by 2 of his best friends, Lois and Laxalt.
Well, there are 230 million people in the United States. Really,
So who did you recommend?
Well, I think it would be a very qualified person.
Like who?
Well, there are a lot of them out there.
What was the president's mood like today?
Very good. We had a good...
Angry. Was he angry?
He wasn't angry with us. I think he was very pleased to see us, and he knew that we were there to be helpful, and I think it's, I think it's an step in the right direction. He asked us to come down and talk about it. So,
Mr. Cheney,
yes, sir.
Do you think, a lot of people have said all along the president ought to go before the American people and say that he made a mistake and he's going to correct it. Do you think that he has to have some measure of contrition when he speaks next Wednesday night?
Can we have a person microphone, please? We can't see him back.
Mistakes were made is a wonderful phrase, but he hasn't done the job so far.
I think it's clear from the president's mood what he said to us this morning, as well as what he said previously, that he accepts the responsibility for what happened, that ultimately he is responsible for the way his staff functions, and I've never sensed any desire on his part to avoid accepting that responsibility. He said it repeatedly.
Is that the same as blame?
Do you think this is an aberration, or do you think there's a history? Do you think I'm guessing the president's actions? One at a time, Sam. Yeah, but can I answer to my question? Accepting responsibility, sir, is what he said repeatedly, and it hasn't been enough.
I would say, Sam, that I think if he had it to do over again, he would do it differently. Chris, what was your question?
Do you
Aberration.
agree with the Tower Commission that this was an aberration, or do you see a history of the president's lax management style?
Well, I think it's important to keep this in perspective. This president is one of the most successful presidents we've had in the post-war period. He's had a number of foreign policy successes. Now, there have been problems in addition to the Iranian thing. I think many of you know I wasn't happy with what happened at Reykjavik. But I think on balance, he has taken the Tower Commission report to heart. He's the one who asked for it. He deserves a lot of credit for having the courage to submit himself and his administration to that kind of scrutiny. And I am confident that when all is said and done, he will have in fact responded the way he needs to respond, which is very boldly and very decisively to reestablish the authority of his administration.
Congressman, we're told that he called you yesterday, among others. What kind of advice is he now seeking?
Well, he's asking for us to say whatever we want to say within the framework of the report. That is, we're free to talk about personnel, we're free to talk about procedures and processes within the administration. specific advice, I think, is most effective if you give it to him privately and not come out in front of the cameras and specify
When someone
afterwards.
says they're going to take full responsibility, that's an overview and it's the official line. We want to know if he feels he's to blame for what happened. Is he to blame for what happens in the White House?
Helen, I think I've addressed the question, and if it's going to go beyond that, it seems to me that's for the president to say.
Was Regan present at the meeting just now?
No, Don Regan was not present.
Does the Tower Board report put this matter behind the president, as it were, or are there still many unresolved doubts that are going to keep this matter in the news?
My view is that it's going to be around for some time. I think this does take care of at least a portion of it, but it doesn't address the Contra issue at all. But let's face it, when the select committees start, Dick's a member of the select committee, a ranking Republican, they'll be going over the whole territory again, so there'll be replays and there may be additional information, maybe points that the Tower Commission may have missed, may not have stressed, that the committee may want to stress.
Senator Dole, are you troubled by all these people turning down the president for chief of staff?
Well, I don't know who's turned him down. I mean, I've read reports, but I wasn't, I don't know if that's a fact. We didn't ask the president who had turned him down. We did indicate that if there's going to be a change, we do have this heavy legislative schedule. Ought to be someone who's familiar with what's going on the Hill, and somebody will help us and work for the Democrats and get some of the legislative load completed.
Senator Dole, how big a house?
Did names come up?
No names. We didn't get into names.
Senator Dole, how deep a house cleaning does he need to do? How deep and wide?
Oh, I don't know. I'll leave that up to the president. I think he's been stimulated by all this to take action.
Stimulated.
Well, the president
Whatever it
feels good today. Why would the president feel good today after yesterday's report?
Oh, I don't know. He felt good yesterday, But, I thought he did. I mean,
You've left it with...
I think he's reading. He said he's about a fourth of the way through the report. He's going to spend the rest of the weekend on it. He seems to think everything is, it's tough. He's taking his lumps. He's a big guy, and he's willing to do that. He's got a lot of support across the country, and he wants the truth out. And I think
Does
he feels...
he think that Colonel North is still a national hero?
That wasn't mentioned.
I've got work to do.
Were any of you offered a job?
Thank you all very much.
You offered a job?
Well, that is the little gathering with the White House press corps in front of the White House with Senators Dole and Simpson and Representatives Michel and Cheney. The Republicans that the president had in for a long chat today on T+1, the day after the issuance of the Tower report on the Iran-Contra affair. You heard what they had to say, not much substantive news issued from that, but they described the president, as he always is described, as cheerful, upbeat, and glad to see them come by. As to who may be the new chief of staff replacing Donald Regan, under whom the skids are well greased, there was no indication as to who that might be. Senator Simpson had perhaps the most intriguing possibility, said there are 230 million people in America today, and I bet before sunrise you probably will have heard all of them mentioned. And the Day Watch will continue too.
Day Watch is brought to you by the people and places of Weston. Caring, comfortable, civilized.
A traveler on business needs an ally in someone who knows what is best and by what arts it may be secured.
Country. Hard times in the oil patch, beginning on Newswatch at 5 p.m. Eastern, on CNN.
And President Reagan recover from Iran amok. Next on Take Two, Representative Jan Meyers reacts to the Tower Commission report.
I'm Lois Hart with Dave Walker. Suicide. Why do they do it? Professor Edwin Schneidman explores the causes and prevention of life's cry for help.
She makes her living playing the records she likes and wearing whatever she wants.
I try to be as little influenced as possible by other people and other things.
Meet one of New York's favorite nightclub DJs. Next on Take Two, right after the news.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Hello, I'm Steve Schatz. It's noon in the East and time for Take Two. First, a look at the latest news from CNN. President Reagan is reportedly discussing a replacement for White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan. He came under sharp criticism from the Tower Commission investigating the Iran arms deal. Some sources say Regan may leave his post next week, but Senator Bob Dole, within the hour, sounded as though Regan's departure is more imminent.
Well, I think he wants to move forward. I think the president feels that there may be a perception out there with some that he's not in charge, that he hasn't, nothing's been happening down there. As Bob just said, there have been 4 or 5 major initiatives this year, even during all this investigation. I think the important thing is the president asked for the Tower Commission. He asked for the truth. It's out. There'll be other matters, I assume, will be explored by the Select Committee. There will be a new chief of staff. We don't know who it's going to be or when it's going to be announced. There may be other changes.
President Reagan is apparently leaving it up to Regan as to just when he will leave. The next phase of the developing Iran arms investigation was outlined in the Tower Commission report released yesterday. It is a list of unanswered questions, many of which center on the activities of Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. For example, what happened to as much as $20 million in profits from the Iran arms deal? Was some of that money diverted to help the Nicaraguan Contras? How much? By whom? There are also questions related to a possible cover-up. What documents were shredded by Lieutenant Colonel North? And do notes exist of certain official meetings where former National Security Advisor John Poindexter was the note taker? The commission raises the question also of possible legal violations in the Iran-Contra affair. The panel found that a number of U.S. laws may well have been broken. Most of the legal questions center around when President Reagan first approved Israeli shipment of U.S. arms to Iran. The president has given conflicting accounts of whether he okayed the shipments before or after they began. But the commission says even if he gave oral approval before the first shipment, a number of legal requirements were not met. One of those is informing congressional intelligence committees about covert actions in a timely fashion. The Tower report says that requirement was ignored. Vice President George Bush is still to comment on the Tower report. He's on the road picking up some presidential support in New Hampshire. CNN's Lynn Brown has details now from our Northeast Bureau.
Republican Governor John Sununu has endorsed Bush for the 1988 GOP presidential nomination. Bush is expected to speak in New Hampshire tonight. In an interview in today's New York Times, Bush says the White House did not break any laws in the Iran-Contra affair, and he added that he is not, in his words, trying to cover his own backside. Democratic hopeful Gary Hart was in New York when the Tower Commission report was released. He blamed the White House for the scandal.
What went wrong here was a failure of policy, a lack of trust in the American people, a refusal to live up to the laws of this country, a refusal to debate openly and honestly what our policy in Central America ought to be, and going around back doors because of rigid ideological drivenness to get something done in secret and in private that the American people wouldn't support publicly and openly.
Hart is expected to declare himself a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination in April.
Inflation measured at the consumer level was up sharply last month. The Labor Department's Consumer Price Index jumped 0.7% in January. That is the biggest monthly increase in 5 years. A steep rise in energy costs takes most of the blame, with OPEC taking steps to cut production of oil. An increase in energy costs was expected. What was surprising was a 0.5% rise in the cost of food. In January also, America's foreign trade ledger took a walloping. The trade deficit stood at nearly $15 billion for the month, despite efforts to cheapen the dollar's buying power overseas. January's figure is almost 40% higher than the previous month. Not only were imports up by about 7% in January, but exports took a steep 11% dive. The poor showing is expected to fuel a drive for protectionism in the Congress. The Vatican says it is shocked by arrest warrants issued for American Archbishop Paul Marcinkus and 2 other Vatican bank officials. Marcinkus is president of the Vatican Bank. The warrants accuse the 3 of complicity in fraudulent bankruptcy in the 1982 collapse of Italy's largest private bank. In a statement released today, the Vatican says the church officials are immune from Italian prosecution.
2 women are under arrest in Paterson, New Jersey, charged with forcing children into a prostitution ring whose clients paid for sex with the drug crack. Police say the women were in charge of the drugs for sex ring. Young girls got about 2 vials of crack for each job, which they smoked with the women. One is also charged with forcing her 15-year-old stepdaughter into the ring. The arrests were made after a 12-year-old crack addict told police she was beaten for returning from a prostitution job without the drugs. Police are searching as many as 6 more minors they say were involved in the drugs for sex operation. In Los Angeles, 5 people were hurt sliding down emergency escape chutes during a bomb scare on a British Airways jumbo jet. The jet was forced to return to Los Angeles International Airport 30 minutes after takeoff when ground crews warned the pilot of the bomb threat. Someone had called the airline's offices in London to say a bomb had been planted on board. Bomb-sniffing dogs found no explosives on the plane. Steve?
A western storm that's been blamed for at least 5 deaths this week is becoming a problem for many sections of the country today. The slow-moving system has left several inches of snow in the Rockies and is now moving through Texas and stretching across the Gulf states as well. As much as 10 inches of snow is expected in the Carolinas from this storm that is now beginning to enter the nation's capital. I'll be back with more news in about a half an hour. Right now, Take Two gets underway with Dave and Lois.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome to this Friday edition of Take Two. I'm Dave Walker.
And I'm Lois Hardin. Later on the show today, consumer electronics expert Frank Vigiano will show us the absolute latest in voice-activated devices.
All sorts of electronic gadgets and gizmos for you today. But first in the program today, with the release of the Tower Commission report yesterday, a lot of questions are being raised about the future of the Reagan White House.
Representative Jan Meyers of Kansas, a Republican, joins us today on Take Two to assess the damage of the Tower report and to offer her comments on the Iran-Contra affair. Good to see you back, Representative Meyers.
Thank you very much, Lois.
Do you think that it is reasonable to expect the president to change his entire management style in the next 2 years, to change from what he was to a more detail-oriented president?
I think he's going to have to change his management style. I think he's going to have to be much more of a take-charge person in the next few years, just to indicate to all of those around him and to the country at large that he is in control and that he knows what's going on in the White House.
Is he up to it?
I believe that he is. I truly do. The report indicated that people failed, and I think to a certain extent the system failed. But the report also was fairly critical of the president in that it said the National Security Council will work only if the president makes it work. And I think he has simply got to make it work in the next 2 years.
Well, as you pointed out, they say it wasn't a institutional problem, it was a people problem from the president on down. And as you alluded to just a moment ago, if the president is not able to become a more detail-oriented president, he cannot change his management style. Is he, in other words, an ineffective president for the next 2 years?
Well, I'm not going to take that dim a view. I think he will be able to change his style. But if he is unable to change his style, I think it's going to mean that it won't be a strong presidency. It will be a weak presidency. It will be a congressionally managed 2 years.
And what does that do for people like yourself? You have to run again for office shortly. What does that mean for Republicans in general? Tough times ahead?
Well, I am confident that the president is going to be able to do it. So far, I think the president obviously has been hurt. When you say that a management style is bad, that it's weak, that it was chaotic, that's critical. However, the Tower Commission report did not accuse him of deliberate wrongdoing, and I think, at least so far, in the public's eyes, it has not been too destructive to the president. We still have a long way to go, however.
In the public's eyes, what are you telling your constituents back in Kansas? What sort of questions are they asking about the president?
My reaction from the 3rd District in Kansas, I think, has been that they want this resolved as quickly as possible so that we don't have a paralyzed country and a paralyzed presidency. They want it all brought out in as soon as possible and the people dealt with appropriately. I think the people are not as critical of the Iran arms for hostages, reaching out to Iran aspect of it, as they are at what happened after that. The people are concerned that I have talked to in the 3rd District about the fact that large sums of money could be diverted to secret bank accounts, could have been used to support a foreign policy that no one knew was happening. That's what's causing a great deal of concern at home.
Well, and Congress intends to investigate those matters. What would be the ultimate goal of those investigations?
Well, I think it's always to improve the system, of course. There will be some who will want to utilize this for political reasons, to destroy the presidency or damage the presidency. But I think for most people, we are interested in improving the system.
Meaning that somebody like Poindexter and North couldn't circumvent the Congress in the future?
Yes. The Tower Commission report said very strongly that there should have been more hands-on dealings with the NSC, that there should have been more interagency review, that there should have been more process involved. In other words, they had only 2 or 3 meetings in 18 months. There should have been more meetings. There should have been agenda papers. There should have been minutes kept. None of that was done. And if we're going to have an agency that functions separate from CIA and state and defense, they have got to be accountable, and they've got to report to those agencies.
Accountability. A lot of calls, as you have heard recently, no doubt. Donald Regan is on his way out, if not today, very shortly. And there's also calls, Representative Meyers, that Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger should go and Secretary of State Schultz should go. Your thoughts?
I haven't heard as much criticism of Schultz and Weinberger. The Tower Commission report, of course, says that they distanced themselves too much and did not participate in the process. They simply stood back from it, and they were very critical of that. I have heard, however, that Don Regan should go, and a number of people are saying that.
You agree?
Well, I don't give advice to the president, but I do think that it was a very flawed system.
You wouldn't be sorry to see him go necessarily.
Well, I think at this point it might be helpful.
Why is it that it would seem his friends are not rushing to his aid, the president, I mean? Laxalt and Lewis have both said no to the job, to Regan's job.
Well, I don't think that they are staying away from the president. I think that job is a very difficult job, and maybe they foresee that they would not be able to deal with it in the next few years. There have been other people that have been suggested. I think Baker has indicated that he would be willing to accept it if the president needed him and on a short-term basis. And I think very, very highly of Jim Baker. And I think he is highly regarded by many people.
Just a few seconds left, Representative Meyers. Let me interrupt because we only have 2 seconds left. But would you like to see a return to the style of management that they had during the first term of the Reagan administration, where they had a troika, so to speak, 3 advisors aiding the president?
Well, at least we didn't have any disasters when that was occurring. And maybe there is something to be said for more advice, more management in the White House. There have been several names mentioned, and they are all good ones. Like I say, I'm not in the position of giving advice to the president.
Representative Meyers, thank you very much for joining us today on Take 2.
Thank you very much, Lois and Dave. I enjoyed being here.
Good to see you.
What causes a person to attempt suicide? We'll be talking with an expert on that topic next on Take 2.
The time machine is here. A new anti-aging cream that works to reduce years of lines and wrinkles. So different, it's known only by its laboratory code, FD29. So different, you can see and feel dramatic skin improvement in only 12
inches, but snow just the same. Well, more weather coming up a little bit later. Right now, take a look at specific forecasts for cities around the nation for tomorrow.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
At the White House, President Reagan meets with his top advisors tonight to discuss a staff shakeup. Good afternoon. I'm Bernard Shaw in Washington, and this is Newsday. It's the day after the Tower report, and speculation continues on whether White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan is out. Senate Minority Leader Bob Dole says Regan's future is no longer a matter of speculation.
There will be a new chief of staff. We don't know who it's going to be or when it's going to be announced. There may be other changes.
Dole was among several Republican congressional leaders who met with the president this morning. The White House says the president will talk to Donald Regan about his job next week. Speculation continues on who will replace Regan. One candidate officially bowed out today. Former Nevada Senator Paul Laxalt says he could not take the job because it would preclude him from exploring a 1988 presidential candidacy. The White House says the president, quote, is rightfully angry about the mismanagement described in the Tower report. The president meets with his top advisors at the White House tonight on plans to deal with some of the problems outlined in the report. Senator Dole says the president has taken his lumps and he wants the truth out.
There will be changes made.
Those will be announced by the president, but they'll be forthcoming.
How soon?
I don't know how soon, but we had a very good meeting with the president. He was very enthusiastic. We were very candid. He said he was pumping iron. He's back on his regimen and feeling good and ready to go.
President Reagan will deliver a nationally televised speech to respond to that Tower report next Wednesday or Thursday. Oliver North told reporters today he's read the Tower report, but he wouldn't say much about it. When asked if he read the part where Robert McFarland at one point suggested he be brought before a disability review board, North said, "No, I missed that. What page was that on?" McFarland had nothing to say to reporters today as he and his daughter walked to their car on their way to go jogging.
Israel says the Tower Commission report wasn't entirely accurate about the Israeli role in the U.S. arms sales to Iran. The Defense Ministry says Defense Minister Itzhak Rabin did not offer to send Israeli military advisors to help the Contras fighting Nicaragua's Sandinista government. The spokesman says Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North asked for such help, but Rabin turned him down. The spokesman calls the charge totally groundless.
Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres and Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak ended 2 days of talks in Cairo today by agreeing to start working toward a Middle East peace conference this year. But they haven't firmed up the role Palestinians will play in the international conference. Israel already has ruled out PLO participation on the grounds it's a terrorist organization. Peres also is facing problems at home about the conference. Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir is against the idea, and observers say that could lead to a government showdown.
In Lebanon, Syria's military intelligence chief, Brigadier General Ghazi Kenan, says Muslim militiamen had better release their Lebanese hostages or face severe punishment. However, Kenan says his troops can't do much for the 26 foreign hostages in Lebanon because they aren't in territory he controls. And he says a military rescue operation wouldn't be a good idea. Kenan's troops moved into Beirut Sunday to prevent more fighting between Muslim militiamen. They've closed down all militia offices, set up 23 Syrian checkpoints, and are now ordering militiamen to shave off their beards.
A verdict is expected tomorrow in the Paris trial of suspected Lebanese terrorist Georges Ibrahim Abdallah. And a French prosecutor is asking the 7-judge panel hearing the case for a sentence of 10 years or less. Abdallah is charged with plotting the assassinations of U.S. and Israeli diplomats in Paris. An attorney for the U.S. says giving Abdallah a light sentence would be outrageous, but the French prosecutor says, quote, France has no lessons to receive from its allies. Abdallah's supporters carried out a wave of bombings in Paris last year and have threatened more violence if he is not released.
Iran says it has ended its 7-week-long offensive on the Iraqi city of Basra. Iran hasn't captured the city, but it says it never intended to. It just wanted to bleed the Iraqi army. Iran says it killed or wounded 57,000 Iraqis during the offensive. Iraq says 80,000 Iranians were killed. Military strategists say Iran still has troops massed on the border with Iraq, apparently preparing for a final assault.
31 people were killed and nearly 50 injured today during an Afghani bombing raid on Pakistan. Pakistani officials say most of the dead are Afghan refugees who live in the 2 border towns hit today. Many of them are Muslim rebels seeking to overthrow the Soviet-backed communist government in Afghanistan. The State Department condemned the warplane bombing as blatant violation of Pakistani airspace.
Consumer prices.
Horrible. Well, more later. Right now, take a look at some forecasts for cities around the world.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Now a full 60 minutes of foreign news and perspective. This is the CNN International Hour.
The commander of Syrian forces in Lebanon warns kidnappers to release hostages or face the might of Syrian troops. French prosecutors seek a reduced sentence for an alleged terrorist. It's an effort to prevent France from being held hostage to terrorism. This is the International Hour. I'm Ralph Wendy at CNN headquarters in Atlanta.
I'm Bernard Shaw in Washington. Our top story on the International Hour comes from here, the nation's capital. As President Reagan heads into a weekend of meetings and consideration of the Tower Commission report, one action seems fairly certain. Chief of Staff Donald Reagan is on his way out of the White House. CNN senior White House correspondent Charles Bierbauer has more.
The president is described as rightfully angry about the Tower report's judgment of White House mismanagement and intends to make changes as soon as possible.
There will be a new chief of staff. We don't know who it's going to be.
White House sources say a choice has been made, but won't disclose the name. It will not be Drew Lewis, former Secretary of Transportation, although the president called Lewis to see if he would be available. Lewis, now the head of Union Pacific, wanted the job when Don Regan got it. Lewis told the president he's not available. Former Senator Paul Laxalt called the president to say he can't do it because he's still considering a long-shot run for the presidency. White House sources say the president will let current Chief of Staff Regan set the timing for his departure. It will not be long. The president is expected to address the nation Wednesday evening to respond to the Tower Board's assessment that his own management style was lax and his Chief of Staff allowed chaos to descend upon the White House. The president stayed out of sight reviewing the report. He also met or phoned more than a dozen members of Congress to get their assessment. Congress was never consulted on the Iran arms deal.
I think he said he's about a fourth of the way through the report. He's going to spend the rest of the weekend on it. He seems to think everything is, it's tough. He's taking his lumps. He's a big guy, and he's willing to do that.
I think on balance, he has taken the Tower Commission report to heart. He's the one who asked for it.
There will be more meetings with advisors and old friends over the weekend. The president, having taken some bad advice on the Iran arms deal, is now taking all the advice he can get on how to salvage the last 23 months of his presidency. Charles Bierbauer, CNN, the White House.
Former National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski says the president will have to do more to correct the problems at the White House than replacing Regan. Brzezinski says the president's secretaries of defense and state are a problem, too.
He ought to install, in my judgment, a new team in the area of foreign policy and White House. In other words, a new chief of staff, a new secretary of state, maybe even a new secretary of defense. Not in the sense of scapegoating, but in the sense that only a new team would galvanize the administration, give the country a sense that something new is being generated, that the president can, in fact, assertively lead over the next 2 years.
Secretary of State George Shultz claims U.S. credibility on the issue of arms sales to Iran has not been hampered. Mr. Shultz says he's planning to express his concern about Chinese arms sales to Iran when he meets with leaders in Beijing.
The Speaker of the Parliament in Iran says the Tower Commission report proves that President Reagan lied about arms sales to Iran. Hashemi Rafsanjani delivered a sermon at Tehran University today, and he praised the report. He said it confirmed what Iran has been saying all along. Rafsanjani said the United States was sorry it severed ties with Iran after the embassy takeover in 1979. He claimed the United States used its hostages in Lebanon as a pretext to try to reestablish relations. Israeli Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin has a few complaints about the Tower report. He denies an allegation in the report that said he offered to supply weapons and Israeli advisors to the Contras in Nicaragua. Rabin says Colonel North suggested the idea, but he rejected it. Later this hour, John Donvan will have a report on European reaction to the Tower investigation, and we'll be speaking with 2 foreign correspondents about the impact.
In Beirut, a warning, a tough one to battling Muslim militias. It comes from Syria's military commander, who's trying to end the latest rounds of violence without more bloodshed. He's also offered a hope for freeing hostages now held in Lebanon. CNN's Ben McNitt reports from Damascus.
The commander of Syrian forces in Lebanon has warned kidnappers that unless they immediately release all hostages, his forces will act directly against them. The statement was broadcast over Lebanese radio stations and printed in at least one Lebanese newspaper. 27 foreigners, including 8 Americans, are missing in Lebanon. In addition, at least 2,000 Lebanese have been kidnapped during the last 3 years of militia warfare. There are conflicting accounts whether the warning to release the hostages was intended to imply to all kidnapped victims, foreign and Lebanese, or only to Lebanese hostages. Brigadier General Ghazi Kenan said he was warning the kidnappers for the last time to immediately free all hostages, otherwise direct action will be taken against them. The statement did not clarify what action is contemplated. On Thursday, Kenan ruled out a military mission to rescue foreign hostages. In Damascus, a senior military source said Kenan's latest statement should be interpreted to mean he is demanding the release of all hostages, both foreign and Lebanese. The source said Syria has a plan to free the hostages if the kidnappers do not release them. He left unstated whether the plan involves the use of political pressure or military force or both. He implied that action to free foreign hostages is not imminent. The Syrian security commander in Lebanon has also said Beirut International Airport, closed since February 7th, is now secure and regular air traffic may resume there. He called for foreign embassies to reopen in West Beirut and for journalists who evacuated the city to return. Ben McNitt, CNN, Damascus.
Iran is claiming victory in its latest offensive against Iraq. Some sources are saying Iran has the upper hand in that 7-year war, in part because of the weapons it received in the Iran-Contra affair. The southern front between Iran and Iraq is now quiet, but Iranian troops reportedly are still there for a threatened assault aimed at final victory over Iraq. Also in the Middle East, Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres leaves Cairo after issuing a joint communique with President Hosni Mubarak. It calls for an international conference on Middle East peace this year. That call, a controversial one, Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir doesn't want it. The United States welcomes it as a chance to get peace efforts back on track.
Afghan warplanes swooped across the Pakistani border today, dropping their bombs on 2 Afghan refugee camps. More than 30 people were killed, dozens more injured in the attack. It was the second Afghan air raid into Pakistan in 2 days. Most of the casualties were Afghan refugees, although several Pakistani relief workers were also caught in the crossfire. The United States condemned the air raid and called it a blatant violation of Pakistani airspace. Pakistan is allied with the Muslim guerrillas seeking to overthrow Afghanistan's Soviet-backed government. The attacks are jeopardizing peace talks currently going on between Pakistan and Afghanistan in Geneva. There are new reports of violence in the Philippines today. An explosion ripped through a Muslim neighborhood just west of Zamboanga City. Police report that the blast killed 9 people and injured 13. Meanwhile, the Filipino Commission released its report today on the violent Manila rally that left 12 people dead. Soldiers fired on a crowd of protesters outside the presidential palace last month. The panel told President Corazon Aquino that both sides must share blame for the violence. The report recommended the prosecution of the leader of the march for making inflammatory remarks, and it urged that soldiers and policemen be brought to trial for unnecessarily firing their guns. Coming up on the CNN International Hour, we're expecting a late report from Paris on the possible sentence reduction of accused terrorist George Abdul. And as Europeans brace for the spread of AIDS in their countries, an American AIDS victim is in a German prison. He's being held on suspicion of recklessly transmitting the AIDS virus.
Guess what? What?
Now back to the International Hour on CNN.
Reaction of the European allies to the Tower Commission report seems to be a consensus that the Iran-Contra affair has sapped the Reagan presidency. And at least one ally is taking stock of its relationship with the United States. CNN's John Donvan reports from London.
Nearly all the London newspapers wrote up the Tower Commission report as an indictment of Ronald Reagan's foreign policy and management skills. The verdict is guilty but asleep, writes The Guardian, while The Independent speaks of a black day for President Reagan. And here in Europe, as in Washington, there's a sense that more is to come.
The detail is still to come, and there is considerable concern that may be further damaging, perhaps not only to the United States administration, but perhaps to some other allies.
Britain's Prime Minister Thatcher may be in a difficult position, so closely has she allied herself with President Reagan. Her opponents are already mixing the Tower report into British politics.
My own feeling is that it has shown the shallowness of some of her foreign policy judgments, the way that she has consistently tied herself to President Reagan.
While this member of Thatcher's own party thinks it's best not to say too much.
We have far more to lose than to gain by seeking to undermine or vilify a president of the United States.
Much of the French press concludes that Reagan's credibility has suffered possibly permanent damage. Some French already are eulogizing the Reagan administration, whose officials were seen, if nothing else, to be sure of themselves.
They are losing that image of confidence and strength.
Communist spokesmen were more aggressive, the Soviets saying that the Tower Commission had shielded President Reagan from blame, not a view shared by most of Western Europe. Most of the time, Europeans seem to love taking potshots at President Reagan, particularly when he's made mistakes. But this time, the sense of negative consequences for everybody seems to be making the potshotters think twice. John Donvan, CNN, London.
Joining us on the International Hour here in our Washington Bureau, Ullrich Schiller. He's with the German newspaper Zeit, and Abdul Salam Massarueh with the Arab American Media Service. Both these men are based here in Washington. Mr. Massarueh, what did you lead with in reporting on the Tower Commission?
That the Reagan administration completely lost touch with the realities of politics in the Middle East, and especially in the Iran arm deal. That the Reagan administration, I think it buried completely its credibility, and there will be no chances of reviving this credibility as long as Mr. Reagan is the President of the United States, and the Middle East is looking forward for the next President of the United States.
Mr. Schiller, as you talked with your editors and thought about your readers yesterday when you were writing your copy, what did you lead with?
I mentioned the point that even the Federal Republic has been heard, as small as the point may be, but tow missiles have been shipped to Ramstein Air Force Base, reloaded in the CIA plane, and then shipped to Israel, which is against any treaty in the framework of NATO. So even under this regard, it was shocking. But for most of Germans, I would say it's kind of a sad reconfirmation about what we knew all along, that the president, in his political capabilities, has been overrated, unfortunately.
You have been to the mountain of crisis in the White House before. You were here during the Watergate period. Did you get a chance in your initial pieces to put some perspective there, or did you later do that in the sidebar?
No, I did already two things. First of all, Watergate, the difference was the president did not cooperate in the investigation. In fact, he was against that. Second, in this case, the president was cooperating, but the results may be more or less not the same, but damaging in a very similar way. And for the Europeans who always are complaining if the American president is too strong, they always have also reason to complain if he is too weak. The question, would the American system have to be reformed in a way to make it easier to change the man on the top, as the European democracies can do it, but apparently Americans like the system so much that we cannot count on that. We are scared specifically because we are witnessing the Soviet Union getting stronger every day and more attractive in the man-top Gorbachev.
Mr. Massarueh, what about the Israeli connection in this story? How'd you handle that?
The Israeli connection has been from the outset, from the beginning, when it was revealed long before, because Israelis all along wanted prolonging the war and the suffering and the misery of people in the Middle East. They were not the biggest lovers of Iran. At the same time, they were not the biggest amorous people with Iraq. According to David Kimche, who was the biggest instigator of the whole thing, and he put the whole plan together with Ali North and Nimrud and Schumer and all of the Israelis, they wanted the Iran-Iraq war to continue as long as it could continue because of the fact that this is good for Israel. And the Israelis coached the United States very well, and coached these people in the White House and outside the White House to get involved from A to Z, taking advantage of what they call it, that special relationship between Israel and the United States, which I think it is to the chagrin of a lot of American citizens here, seeing that their resources are being pooled into something which is not bringing them any solace. Go look at an example, for instance, this week is happening. President Hosni Mubarak was supposed to be here this past week, and he canceled his visit to the United States. And King Hussein of Jordan said, no way that I will come to the United States because they betrayed my ally, Iraq. And the Gulf Cooperation Council is going seeking arms and weapons to bolster itself against the Iranian threat and against also the Israeli threat, which is interjected through the Iranian threat from the Soviet Union and from European allies. So the Middle East has completely lost its touch with the United States, or rather the United States lost its touch with the Middle East, and you're going to see more rolling, like my colleague from Germany said, that strengthening of the Soviet Union in this matter, and a lot of people are going to go to the East Bloc and the European community, and you're going to be getting less and less contact from the Middle East.
Mr. Schiller, your impression, how have the revelations affected the United States anti-terrorism policy?
Well, certainly there's a lot of more in lack of credibility, a lack of, I would say, reliability. We have been preached always that didn't do enough against terrorism, or we're not sharp enough against that, and witnessing how this president handled the second Iran crisis is certainly, to say the least, disappointing or disillusioning. And many Europeans and many Germans may feel reconfirmed that their tactic to deal with terrorists in the long run may be more efficient than the attempts to deal with them militarily or to deal with them by delivering weapons to the foe. So, and the credibility lack certainly is also to be seen in the sequence after the summit of Reykjavik, where after all the president did not come out as glorious as the White House seemed to put it immediately afterwards.
I'm just curious, is the United States not being held up to a double standard? Is there not some naivete here? After all, this is a policy that the president said would no longer be pursued, no longer would arms be traded for hostages. Isn't the United States being held unfairly by its allies?
Well, how do you mean unfairly? I mean, he says one thing and does the other one. That's what I mean with credibility, loss of credibility. It's a disappointment, just to put it mildly. And for the future, what do we have to expect? 1.5 years until the next elections, but a time which is utmost important in terms of arms control, the financial situation, the alliance situation, money. There's a lot of things that have to be resolved, but can you tell me how it's going to happen with this type of weak administration?
Ullrich Schiller, to answer your question for me, no, I cannot tell you. Ullrich Schiller, from the newspaper Zeit in Germany, and Abdul Salam Massarueh with the Arab American Media Service. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us on the International Hour. We'll return in a moment.
History tells us that Africa has had a closer relationship with Russia than many thought, but it's seldom discussed when the subject of Russia's social history comes up. One forum where it is discussed is the book Russia and the Negro, Blacks in Russian History and Thought. Joining us now on the CNN International Hour is the author of that book, Allison Blakely, Associate Professor of European History and Comparative History at Howard University. Dr. Blakely, in news pictures we get from the Soviet Union, we never see scenes of blacks. Why not? Where are they?
There are not very many. I've often wondered myself why we've never seen scenes of at least one group that I discovered in my research. In the region of the Caucasus, on the Black Sea shores, up until very recently, there were settlements of distinctively black African communities which date back a few centuries. My own sense is that for whatever reasons, the Soviet government decided to deliberately disperse these populations throughout the Soviet Union, perhaps to avoid any kind of situation where one might look for what you might call a Negro question in the Soviet Union.
Well, do we have to understand the words Negro and black in a Russian text?
It's a very difficult term to export any place, in a sense. The term black, if you take it outside of the United States,
Doctor,
has a different meaning.
Excuse me, Doctor, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you right now. We have a news story coming up, and we go to our Washington Bureau and Bernard Shaw. Bernie?
Thank you very much, Ralph. Let's go quickly to the White House North Lawn, and correspondent Frank says no. Frank, what do you have for it?
Well, Bernie, CNN has been told that a decision has been made in replacing Chief of Staff Donald Regan here in the White House, the first step in what may be an extensive staff shakeup. And all indications point that it will be former Senator Howard Baker, that Howard Baker will come on board largely to repair relations with the Congress and help the president put his house back in order. Sources tell CNN that Republican congressional leaders on Capitol Hill have been pressing Howard Baker, at least since yesterday, to consider this job, and a decision is expected imminently from the White House. Spokesmen for the former senator, for Baker, say that Baker is not reachable by telephone today. However, they would decline comment when asked point blank if, in fact, Baker will be coming here to the White House to serve. Now, the decision has been made, we're told. Exactly how the announcement will be made is not yet exactly clear. However, as I say, all indications point to Senator Howard Baker to come in and help the president begin to put his house back in order. Bernie?
Frank, excellent work by you and the staff. Searching my memory very quickly, a couple weeks ago, is it not true that Baker was asked if he would take the job? He said no, he declined, and then President Reagan, I think, made a phone call to Howard Baker and did not ask him to take the job, but said, I regret that you're not going to take the job?
Well, that's exactly right. In fact, what we're told happened is that Reagan spoke to Baker in some detail, and Baker was somewhat offended that he was going to be handled in such a fashion. Apparently, whether in fact and to what extent the president talked to Baker is still not exactly clear. But obviously this does have significant implications because Baker had been considering a run for the presidency. If he were to come on board here at the White House, that presumably would knock that presidential bid out of the box, and it would, of course, set back Baker's personal political ambitions. Nonetheless, he's a close friend of the president, and he perhaps does feel that a great deal of work needs to be done. He wants to stand by Mr. Reagan at a time of need.
And, of course, Howard Baker enjoys almost universal respect by his colleagues up there in the United States Senate. I suspect that the tracks of Paul Laxalt are somewhere here, with Laxalt apparently, reportedly, declining the job because he's trying to make up his mind about what he's going to do about Campaign 88. I wonder whether or not he didn't say, why don't you lean on Howard Baker a little bit, Mr. President?
Well, that could well be. And I think that it's worth noting here that officials in the White House have for days, perhaps weeks now, been recognizing the need to move with a person of considerable stature at a time such as this. And what one official does tell CNN is that the person who will be named, and of course it does appear now that it will be Howard Baker, the person who will be named is of the stature to help the president put his house back together again.
And I'm now being told that one source is telling CNN, quote, Howard Baker would be one hell of a choice. He would give us instant credibility, unquote.
Well, that's exactly what the White House feels it needs. It's got two crises now. One is the crisis of credibility. The other is the appearance of presidential detachment. And the White House has felt that to the extent that that image of detachment could be corrected, it could be done so by a very swift presidential response following the Tower Board. There are many who felt that the president waited far too long in replacing Reagan, waiting till the Tower Board, allowing Reagan to set the timing of his own departure. Nonetheless, once the Tower Board was issued, many felt the president had to move very, very swiftly indeed. If, in fact, this announcement comes down very shortly, as it would appear it will be, that would be rather swift response following the Tower Board report. As far as any comprehensive statement from the president, that, we're told, will have to wait till Wednesday night when he will be addressing the nation from the Oval Office.
Thank you very much, Frank Sesno, reporting this bulletin from the White House. If you're just joining us in the final seconds of Frank's report, CNN has learned that President Reagan has decided that Howard Baker, the former Tennessee Republican and former Republican Majority Leader from the Senate, he is the choice of the president. Now it's a matter of deciding when to make the announcement. We interrupted an interview here in Washington with a guest. Let's go back to Ralph Wingy in Atlanta. Ralph?
Thank you very much, Bernie, and we wish to apologize to Allison Blakely, the Associate Professor of European History and Comparative History at Howard University in Washington, for having to interrupt, and we hope perhaps in the next week or so, maybe in the next few days, we can have him return. His book is called Russia and the Negro, Blacks in Russian History and Thought, and we will continue with more of the International Hour in just a minute.
In effect, he's the top executive in the state of Vatican City.
Now back to the International Hour on CNN.
Updating our top story now, and indeed it is a breaking story. CNN has learned that President Reagan has made his choice for the successor to his embattled Chief of Staff, Donald Reagan. According to CNN White House correspondent Frank Sesno, the president has chosen as the replacements for Reagan former Senate Majority Leader and Tennessee Senator Howard Baker. CNN has learned from a White House source that Howard Baker's selection, quote, would be one hell of a choice. He would give us instant credibility. We'll keep you informed as to when the White House will formally make this announcement. As you know, the Tower Commission report had declared that the powerful Chief of Staff, Donald Reagan, must bear the responsibility for the chaos which descended on the White House once the Iran-Contra affair was revealed to the public. Ralph?
The Vatican says its chief banker will cooperate with Italian officials investigating the biggest financial scandal in that country in 40 years. American Archbishop Paul Marcinkus and two associates have reportedly been accused of criminal activity in that affair. CNN's Jim Clancy reports from Vatican City.
Warrant issued. Right now, take a look at specific forecasts for cities around the nation for tomorrow.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Stay with Senator Warren Ruttman, who is my friend.
CNN has learned this man, former Senate Majority Leader Howard Baker of Tennessee, has been chosen to replace White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan. A formal announcement from the White House is expected very, very soon. Good afternoon and welcome to the second hour of Newsday in Washington. I'm Bernard Shaw. The speculation has ended at this hour. A successor to Donald Regan has been chosen. CNN's White House correspondent Frank Sesno on the story at the White House with this live report. Frank?
Bernie, a well-placed source tells us that top members of the President's White House staff are meeting at this very moment to determine exactly how and when the announcement will be made that Howard Baker, former Senate Majority Leader, as you pointed out, will come on board to replace Donald T. Regan, the embattled Chief of Staff, who is held primarily responsible for the chaos that descended upon the White House following the Iran disclosures by the Tower Board yesterday. Bernie, one White House official tells us that Baker would be a hell of a choice and would give the White House instant credibility in Congress. And that's exactly what the White House needs in the wake of the Tower report, is credibility, because the President was seen to have had two problems. One, credibility. Two, an image of detachment. The President wanted to move as swiftly as possible following the Tower Board report to make the changes. The changes apparently have been made. Sources tell CNN that former colleagues of Howard Baker, senior Republican officials up on Capitol Hill, have been working on him for a couple of days now, urging him to move forward and renew the interest that he once expressed in the job. As you, Bernie, pointed out a little while ago, Baker was approached by the White House some time ago for the Chief of Staff's job, but because he was considering a run for the presidency, he wanted to hear from President Reagan himself that Baker's presence would be so badly needed that Baker should abandon those hopes for the presidency. Apparently that has happened now. The exact timing of the announcement is unclear, although what we do hear is that apparently it will not be President Reagan himself who will be making the announcement, at least not in person. The President, as you know, is studying the Tower Board report. He intends to meet with his close associates this weekend and speechwriters, all in preparation for that very important speech that he plans to deliver Wednesday night from the White House, from the Oval Office of the White House. He intends to address the nation on the implications of the Tower Board report and where he intends to go, of course now being helped by former Senate Majority Leader Howard Baker. Bernie?
Frank, I would presume, I find it very interesting that the President won't make the announcement himself, but I presume he does not want to see reporters, he doesn't want to see any reporters or anybody until he's ready to comment officially on the Tower Commission report.
That's exactly right. If the President were to show his face at a time like this, he'd be mauled by questions. There are so many of them that are pending for him, and the President has made very plain that he wants to go through the Tower Board report with a fine-tooth comb before he's in a position to comment. There conceivably could be a number of pitfalls were there to be any confusion. That's not to say, however, that he couldn't come out to say, well, this is going to be Howard Baker who's going to be joining me here, and I'm not going to take any questions. Off he goes. He's done that before. But what we're told is this probably will not involve the President.
One thing I'd like to clear up, I was saying that when you first made your decathlon run from the White House press room to get on the air with this breaking story, I'd said that Howard Baker had talked to the President, had been approached by Donald Regan for the job of Chief of Staff. Carol Cratty, our producer at the White House, sends word that it was actually for the job of the Director of Central Intelligence. I just wanted to clear that up.
Well, that's a good point. I think what it does represent clearly, though, is that the White House, the President himself, has been looking very closely at Baker for quite some time. They have a good working relationship. They established that during Baker's time as Senate Majority Leader. And the White House feels, and officials say, that someone of the kind of stature that Baker could bring to the job is exactly what's needed at this time. The President is clearly at the low point of his presidency. He's trying to battle back this weekend. These few days in here between now and Wednesday are very important times for the President, and he wants to be seen moving as decisively as possible.
In political Washington, for every action, there's a reaction, and if this man goes into that job succeeding Donald Regan, it's going to impact on Campaign 88. We know for a fact that Howard Baker still was making up his mind as to whether to commit in the primary process for the race for the Republican nomination for the presidency. And, of course, Frank, by going into this Reagan White House, he effectively takes himself out of the mix and creates a kind of accordion effect on the Republican horse race.
That's exactly right. Of course, it's very hard to determine exactly what implications it might have for other candidates It could be said, however, that Baker was always a bit of a long-shot candidate. He recognized that himself. I spoke with him about 6 weeks ago or so. He said he was mulling the decision over, but he recognized that he was a long-shot case. He has been interested in other top jobs in this administration, though, and perhaps he sees that he can play the role of a savior of sorts. It's a high-risk gamble, though, because many, many people, both here at the White House and on Capitol Hill, see that the president has a very long way to battle back to the kind of credibility that he once enjoyed, and most feel that he will never be able to regain the Reagan mystique that he had before the elections of this past fall.
One quickie, Frank. It just occurred to me. I was trying to think of it, and it just came up to me. This White House has been very concerned about image. Who won the greatest respect among the many members of the Senate Watergate Committee than Howard Baker of Tennessee, who at the time asked the question that shall always be remembered. What did the president know, and when did he know it?
Well, that's a good point, and I think that clearly image has been very much on the minds of those who've been involved in this selection process, and let it be said that the President and Mrs. Reagan, along with Senator Paul Laxalt, a close friend, and other close California friends, have been intimately involved. And the whole notion of reaching to a Senate majority leader, a former Senate majority leader, and the kind of stature that that conveys is something that the White House badly wanted, badly needed at this time. They will be looking most particularly to improve relations with Capitol Hill. The president, after all, lost his Republican majority in the Senate this last election year, and in any case, faces tough sledding up on Capitol Hill. Relations have to be improved, if anything, as far as the Reagans are concerned, is going to be salvaged from these next and final 2 years of his presidency.
Thank you very much. Frank Sesno reporting live from the White House, and of course is soon, and if there is a word from the White House following up on this breaking story, we will go right back there live. Now quickly to Don Miller in Atlanta.
Many Israeli officials said today the Tower Commission report shows the Iran-Contra affair is mostly an internal American matter. Israel also denied evidence cited in the report that...
Cain, CNN reporting.
The 5 astronauts scheduled to fly the next space shuttle mission met today with workers and technicians at Cape Canaveral, Florida. The crew promised to meet eye to eye with as many space workers as possible before the flight, now set for February of next year. Today, the 5 astronauts met with workers at the launch pad, the assembly building, and in offices. Shuttle flights have been suspended since the Challenger disaster last year, in which all 7 crew members were killed, although the next flight is scheduled for about a year from now. Many observers believe the launch date is unrealistic, saying the next shuttle is more likely to take off later in 1988.
Although the White House has not formally announced that Howard Baker will succeed Donald Regan as White House Chief of Staff, reaction already is tumbling from Capitol Hill. Let's listen to Democrat James Sasser of Tennessee, who says that Howard Baker is a real coup for the White House.
I think it'd be very difficult to run for president from the Reagan White House in the job of Chief of Staff. My guess is that Senator Baker has made a tough choice, and that is he's chosen to serve President Reagan and to abandon his own presidential aspirations. Given the problems of the Reagan White House at this time, it appears to me that'd be a very poor platform to launch a presidential candidacy from.
His appointment in itself will change what's happening at the White House and make Reagan look as though he's in charge?
I think Senator Baker's appointment as Chief of Staff will give the White House substantial breathing room. In other words, this brings, I think, some credibility to the White House and to the White House staff that it has not had and which it has desperately needed. And I think this also indicates that the president is sensitive to the Congress and sensitive to his credibility with the Congress.
Do you think the American people will feel better about this?
The American people, I believe, will feel better with Howard Baker as Chief of Staff in the White House.
What do you think? What kind of changes do you think he'll make, sir?
Well, I hope that he'll establish some order in the White House, and I hope we'll see an orderly flow of the nation's business there, and I'm hopeful that he will grapple with some of the larger policy questions. Senator Baker, I thought, as majority leader, his real forte here was the ability to deal with the larger policy issues in a pragmatic and in a rational way. And I think that's been missing from the White House for the last year and a half.
Do you think he's abandoning his presidential aspirations because he found it impossible to run while out of office or out of the limelight?
Well, he left the Senate because he said you couldn't run for president and be Senate majority leader or minority leader, that it was a full-time job running for president. And I think being chief of staff of the Reagan White House is also a full-time job. You're almost de facto president when you're chief of staff in the Reagan White House, and I see no time left for a presidential campaign.
Senator Sasser, Senator Baker, when he was here, never had a lot of stomach or truck with doing all the detail work of his job. How's he going to handle that at the White House?
Well, my guess is that Senator Baker's operating style will be that as chief of staff, he'll handle the large policy questions, and he'll have a staff that will deal with some of the nuts and bolts and the minutiae of actually running the White House.
Based on your experience with him, do you think he'll be capable of knocking heads at the White House?
I think Howard Baker can be very tough when it's needed. His style of operating generally is to be conciliatory and to try to bring people together. And certainly I think that's needed in this administration, someone who can bring people together and have them pull in the same direction. One of the problems has been in the Reagan White House is you had a number of very powerful dukes, each with their own fiefdom, but no king to bring everyone together and make the hard decisions.
What is it to me that you have a sense that President Reagan has withdrawn to such an extent that Howard Baker is going to be the king or the prime minister?
I think Howard Baker will be the prime minister in the Reagan administration. Clearly, the Tower Commission report, if it said anything, said that this president that we have now is one who does not involve himself in the details of running his administration. Indeed, doesn't even involve himself in some of the large policy decisions.
Senator Sasser, do you think it's ironic that the man who uttered famous questions, what does the president know, when did he know, and is now being asked to see President Reagan through his problems?
Well, I think precisely because he is the man who uttered the phrase, what did you know and when did you know it, is one thing that makes his appointment as chief of staff of the White House such a stroke of genius. I think, quite frankly, that Howard Baker fills a gap here that probably few other political figures could fill.
What does it do for Dole's presidential chances? I mean, you've got Iran has damaged Bush. Now Baker is sort of is out of the running.
Well, I don't hold myself as an expert in Republican presidential politics, but I would say that this appears to boost Senator Dole's chances. Here is one other likely contender for the Republican nomination who's out of the picture. And to some extent, Senator Baker and Senator Dole would be attracting some of the same support. One I can think of right off is the junior senator from New Hampshire.
Speaking of Senator Dole, I think that he wants to comment on this.
Is he around the corner there? Well, I'll get out of the way.
Thank you very much for coming down.
Tennessee Democrat James Sasser with the first reaction from members of the United States Senate to the word that we found out that President Reagan has made up his mind, and he has pointed to Howard Baker of Tennessee, the former Senate Majority Leader.
Right here.
Podium. Now the Minority Leader, a friend and a respected colleague of Howard Baker. You recall a couple hours ago at the White House, he said definitely that Donald Reagan would go.
Well, I'm just here to say that it was Howard Baker is probably my best friend. He's the right man for the right job at the right time in the right place. And And I've talked to Howard on the telephone. I said, Howard, is it true? And he said, yes. So the president really urged him to do it, and so as a good public servant that he is, he said yes.
Did you discuss the 1988 presidential race, and what does this do to his prospects as a candidate?
I didn't even get into that. I mean, I didn't.
What do you think it does as far as his possible candidacy?
I think it make it very difficult.
What strengths does he bring? What strengths does he bring to that job, Senator, and what weaknesses perhaps?
I think the immediate thing that stands up, we were visiting the president this morning. I said, Mr. President, could all this committees have been meeting, we're going to have an avalanche of legislation about April 1st, maybe before. It better be someone who can deal with the Congress. Now that's what Howard Baker can do. I was talking with a Democrat when I heard it, was very pleased about it. So Howard Baker has instant credibility. He understands the Congress. He's worked with members in both parties. He also understands the White House because as majority leader, he did a lot of work for the Reagan White House, so he understands how the president works and what his style may be. And I believe it's president a home run.
Senator Dole, if this is all
turn around what many perceive as a deteriorating White House, do you think that he's going to be able to quickly do that?
Well, there's going to be a lot of work to do. I mean, I don't think this means that suddenly everything's just coming up roses, but this is certainly the right start. It's also an indication that Ronald Reagan understands the severity of the problem, and he went first class.
Did he tell you in this conversation that he considers this to be the end of his presidential aspirations?
Howard? No, I wish I'd have thought of that.
If this is the only, Senator Dole, if this is what
you said you...
Oh, well, it seems to me that Howard's willing to take this job, and he is. He said he is. That probably would mean that he would not be a candidate. Somebody has that rumor that he's going to make that statement today sometime.
We said the Iran scandal has been pretty good to you. First it's damaged Bush, and now it's taken Howard Baker out.
Well, there's still others left. Football commissioner, yes.
This is the only personnel change the president announces before his speech next week. Is this enough?
Well, I don't know what arrangement he made with the president, but I assume Howard Baker was bringing in a number of new people, so there'd be not just one new face, but I assume there'd be a number of new.
When I'm talking about cabinet level people, is bringing in Howard Baker as new chief of staff, if that's the only major change he makes, going to be enough to create the impression of a new, different looking administration with the president in charge?
Well, I think it's a big, I don't know. I mean, I just can't answer that. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer, you know. It's a giant step in the right direction. I know that. And
Do you see this as a shift on the part of the president? I mean, somehow he's been very adamant about keeping Reagan there. Now he gets rid of him, brings in someone that you guys all like. Is he now saying something different about this whole event, the whole Iran affair?
Well, I don't know, but I can see the fine hand of Paul Laxalt in this somewhere. I think Senator Laxalt has worked closely with Senator Baker, and I think Paul Laxalt understood that to move this forward and to get off the dime, it had to be someone with total credibility and integrity, and somebody who really would be accepted by not only the Congress, but be understood by those who report the news that this is a good pick. And I think we've made some progress.
What was Don Regan's biggest failure? What brought him to this point?
Well, I like Don Regan. I think what brought him to this point is that a lack of rough and tumble political experience. It may not be the best occupation in the world, but unless you've had a little experience in politics to go into that job, it's pretty difficult to do. And I think that was, that was the shortcoming.
Would you analyze for us how you think this might affect your prospects for the nomination?
Well, I don't know. I know Howard Baker had a lot of friends in New Hampshire that indicated if he were not running, they would be for Bob Dole. Now, we'll have to see if that materializes. I don't know whether it makes any great difference. I mean,
One of those men be Warren Rudman?
well, one of those could be Warren Rudman, but I haven't trying to reach him on the phone now, but he's not home. So, the question whether they're both drinking from the same cup, Bob Dole and Howard Baker, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen any surveys that would indicate either way.
How would you anticipate Senate Democrats would react to this selection?
Well, I think extremely well. I asked Howard if he talked to Senator Byrd. He said no, that was his next call. And knowing Senator Byrd's relationship with Senator Baker was very good. I think he'll be excited about it and pleased. That doesn't mean we're always going to agree. Don't misunderstand us. We'll probably have our differences. We may have differences with the new chief of staff, but that's not the point. The point is that it's going to be someone who's well received across the country.
Do you think there are problems like on arms control and some other issues in which Mr. Baker might be, seen as a little bit more liberal than you are and more liberal in the White House?
Well, I don't want to anticipate problems before we've been officially announced yet. I mean, we've already had him.
Well, you officially announced it.
Can you tell us where you talked to him, sir, where he was?
Well, I think he was in his office. I mean, we were on the telephone, but he'd called me at 3 o'clock, and he wasn't able to get back to me until 4 o'clock. I tried to reach him, and he couldn't make the phone.
Do you think Robert Gates is probably going to the Tower Commission? Do you think a combination of Brady and Hill?
I think if there's an early vote, he's in trouble.
Sir, did he indicate, speaking of the CIA, did Senator Baker indicate to you why he wouldn't take the CIA job but would take it?
No. We had a very short conversation. I knew he was busy making other calls. And I just congratulated him and wished him success. So let's get together next week for breakfast or something.
Was there any indication that the White House appointed the President that the President is thinking of sort of changes beyond his Chief of Staff and at that level, like in the Cabinet or anything like that?
I didn't get that impression.
Gates?
I raised it. Didn't say anything.
What do you think?
I indicated that, this is one of the problems we have up here, and if in fact there's an early vote, which Senator Bourne indicates he would like to have, that the nomination is probably in difficulty.
Why do you say that? Why do you think a delay in the vote would help him?
Well, I don't know that delay it up either. I think Bourne's point is we can't wait till after the select committee finishes. That's 6 to 8 months with an acting director.
Would you recommend Howard Baker as the President that Gates is going to be the
No, I don't think so. I think I'll let somebody else make that. We're doing a little checking around over the weekend. We'll be back to you on Monday. Yeah. More or less.
What's the great first step, Senator, for the President to regain control? What else does he have to do? What next?
I think what he needs to do now in his message to the people next week is to spell out, not to try to get into a contest and who knows more details about all this than, does he know more than the Senate Intelligence Committee or someone else. I think he needs to recognize the report, accept full responsibility, indicate that he's not happy with the mistakes that were made, and some of them were made by himself, errors of omission, not watching it closely enough, and assure the American people that, having said that we still have an agenda before Congress, spell out what he's done this year. I mean, he's got the budget up, record time, we've got the trade package up here, we've got welfare reform, catastrophic coverage. I mean, a lot has happened in the past couple of months on the legislative side, which is, I don't say has been ignored, but it hasn't had the focus it normally would have because of the Iranian matter. So.
Do you expect Senator Baker to have a moderating influence on any of the legislative policies coming up right now?
I don't know. I might have, might not.
What will be the most striking differences between him and Mr. Reid?
Well, I said Howard brings all this wealth of experience to the legislative branch. That's the big, big difference. Don Regan brought a lot of things to the job, but one thing he didn't bring was the knowledge of Congress. Howard Baker has the knowledge of Congress. He knows the president very well. It's not like some stranger walking in off, bringing in someone who's going to have to be trained for a while. He knows how the White House operates. He works well with all members of the cabinet, as far as I know. And he could report to work Monday.
And the First Lady, will get along?
I don't know. I'm certain they do, yes. When to think of it, yes.
President, what the president said to him that got him to accept it?
No, we didn't get into those details. I'm a concept.
You're getting a detail here?
More details. Turn it over to somebody else.
He said when this was nailed down in terms of his accepting the job.
Must have been, the president told us that he met with us at 10:30, and we left about 10 after 11, and I asked him about 11, I think it was, about all this legislative avalanche. There ought to be someone who could really move in on it. He said, you're going to be very pleased, so I assume he knew it before he met with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator.
Republican leader Bob Dole of Kansas from the Senate, he shared some very important news with us. But first of all, to tell you, there is reaction from Nancy Reagan, whom, as we've reported to you, worked overtime in the past couple of weeks to make sure that Donald Reagan's days in the White House would be very, very short. According to First Lady Nancy Reagan's press secretary, Elaine Crispin, Mrs. Reagan has said from the East Wing of the White House of Howard Baker's impending arrival, quote, they are longtime friends, referring to President Reagan and Senator Baker. They are longtime friends. I'm delighted he will be with us, unquote. That word from First Lady Nancy Reagan. The bit of news that surprises this reporter is that for the first time from Congress, at least from the Senate Republican side, apparently the nomination of Robert Gates to be the next Director of Central Intelligence is indeed in trouble. You heard Howard Baker just a few moments ago say that if the nomination were brought up now for an early vote, that nomination is probably in difficulty. And apparently in his congratulatory telephone conversation with Senator Howard Baker, Mr. Dole told Baker that the Gates nomination is in difficulty. You'll recall in our live coverage of the Senate Intelligence Committee hearings, that committee indicated it would not vote on the Gates nomination until the Tower Commission report had been released. It is now out, and I do recall the committee indicating that it wanted to recall Mr. Gates for another round of testimony. And we hear Bob Dole now indicating that the nomination is in difficulty because of Mr. Gates' role in some aspects of the Iran-Contra affair. And Dole shared with us the fact that at this morning's meeting, the president was told that he's going to have a lot of legislative problems. The president telling the senators who met with him this morning, you're going to be surprised. And, of course, indeed, it is a surprise. And I'm also told that in a few minutes, Senator Howard Baker at his downtown law office here in Washington will be having a news conference. Our CNN people are there to bring us the latest word on what he has to say. Samuel Kernan, a senior fellow with the Brookings Institution, has written a book. Believe it or not, the title of his book, Chief of Staff, 25 Years of the Presidency. It just came out a matter of weeks ago on the University of California Press. How more timely can you be?
Just luck, I guess.
Dr. Kernell, before we leap into Howard Baker's succeeding Donald Reagan, based on what you lay out in your book, where did Donald Reagan go wrong?
Donald Reagan made a couple of mistakes, pretty fundamental, and some of them have been talked about in the last couple of days with the Tower Commission report. First thing, I agree with John Tower, and it's pretty much a consensus that Don Reagan abrogated to himself more managerial responsibility and authority in the White House than any of his predecessors. And I would include there Bob Haldeman, H.R. Haldeman under Nixon, and Sherman Adams under Eisenhower, the two predecessors that were generally labeled strong chiefs of staff.
Did he confuse the White House with Merrill Lynch?
I think so. The White House politics in general is different from corporations. I think it's fair to characterize a corporation as a place where decisions flow down. The White House in particular, decisions flow up. That is, decisions impinge upon the president. He has choices he must make. And the quality of the choices that are presented to him will be reflected and the quality of the outcome. With Donald Regan, he didn't appreciate the need to assess political risk. He didn't appreciate fully sensitive to the political options that are available to a president. And unlike that first term, where Ronald Reagan had the benefit of Jim Baker and Meese and Deaver and William Clark,
Spencer,
all of whom could walk into the Oval Office at any time, despite Baker, formally being the chief of staff. In this case, Don Regan did everything he could to have central control over the information and the men who flowed through the Oval Office to Ronald Reagan. And in the absence of having good political sensibilities, it was just a very bad mismatch for the president.
I also hear you saying, between the lines, I'm going to have to interrupt and go very quickly to our correspondent at the White House, Frank Sesno. Frank?
Well, Bernie, it's official now. Chief of Staff Donald Regan has resigned. Howard Baker has been appointed. Just a moment ago, the White House released two pieces of paper, one of them very short. You probably won't be able to see it with great detail, but this is it. The letter from Chief of Staff Regan: I hereby resign as Chief of Staff to the President of the United States. Respectfully yours, Donald T. Regan. Sources tell CNN that Regan truly believed up to the last that he had an arrangement with the President whereby his future would not be discussed until next week. Apparently, however, in the final moments of today, that came apart. According to Senate Minority Leader, Republican Leader Robert Dole, the President had in his mind this morning around 11 or so that these changes would be forthcoming. A statement by the President: we will not be seeing the President today, but a statement has been put out in his name, a piece of paper, applauding Donald Regan for his 6 years with the administration, pointing out that after the revelations about Iran, Regan indicated he'd like to stay and help the President and the administration through its travails and through the investigations. Last week, writes the President, Regan indicated that with the release of the Tower Board report, he felt he would like to go through with his original plans to return to private life. I, the President, am therefore accepting, with regret, his resignation as Chief of Staff, effective today. Now, this resignation shows two things. First of all, it shows the speed with which the President has in fact moved, or others around him have moved, to set things right following the Tower Board report. It's been a little more than 24 hours. On the other hand, it shows the President's continued reluctance to show his own face in connection with these actions. In certain circumstances like this, and in fact, in certain circumstances far less significant than this, the President has personally come out and made the announcement. He did no such thing today. For example, I think back to when Health and Human Services Secretary Margaret Heckler resigned. The President was there to announce the resignation. The President has been there in the past to announce other resignations and the successions. In today's case, the President does it with a piece of paper, with great words of praise for Howard Baker, calling him a distinguished American who has served as majority and minority leader of the United States Senate, leader of the Republican Party, a man of unquestioned integrity and ability. The President writes, I am enormously pleased that he is willing to take on this responsibility and to help me organize the White House staff for an aggressive 2 years of work. Sources tell CNN that Baker will have virtual carte blanche to come through the White House and reorganize in any fashion he so desires. One official describes it as a Carlucci type of arrangement. Frank Carlucci, as you know, was appointed head of the National Security Council and conducted a wholesale house cleaning there. So that is the sort of task that Howard Baker may well have before him. Sources furthermore tell CNN that the first to go may be a Regan deputy, Dennis Thomas, and that in fact White House counsel Peter Wallison may follow too. Wallison says he's heard of no such thing, or at least that was the last thing he told us. However, he says, obviously, if the President wants me to go, I'll go. So what we're seeing today, Bernie, is just the very beginning of what will surely be major staff changes at the White House. One other thing, earlier we called the Chief of Staff Regan's office, or what was Regan's office, and asked for him, and we were told, Mr. Regan has resigned, no one is here. A short while ago, his personal secretary called us back and said, indeed, she was still there. The Chief of Staff had submitted his piece of paper, though, and he was gone. It's a very sad day in some ways for the White House, but other officials believe that this could be the fresh start. Certainly, that's what Nancy Reagan hopes, and the President, too. Bernie?
Frank, you just mentioned three key elements. If I hear your report correctly, it seems to me there was one major blow-up at the White House this afternoon. When you consider the fact we tried to get comment from Don Regan's office, Secretary says no one's here, he has resigned, and then the mere text of Donald Regan's resignation letter it's a one-sentence paragraph. A man who served for 6 years and a man who was the target of Nancy Reagan's wrath for a lot of reasons.
That's exactly right. And in fact, Bernie, ironically, to demonstrate just how influential Nancy Reagan has been in all of this, her office issued a statement even before the West Wing, even before the president issued his statement, saying that as far as Nancy Reagan was concerned, Baker and the president were lifetime friends, and Nancy was delighted that he will be with the Reagan team here at the White House. So Nancy confirmed this. Nancy put out the word from the East Wing even before the president did. She certainly has been crucial in urging the president to make sweeping staff changes. She wanted this done months ago.
Thank you very much. Thank you so very much. Our colleague Frank Cesno reporting live from the White House on this breaking story. And we have to apologize to our guest from the Brookings Institution, Dr. Samuel Kernell. He has a new book out called Chief of Staff, 25 Years of the Presidency on the University of California Press. We've run out of time. Howard Baker has a news conference very shortly. We'll be bringing you details from that. For now, I'm Bernard Shaw in Washington. Newsday, Mary Alice Williams and Lou Waters, next on CNN.
When Mrs. Andreoli called the fire department, she didn't know what to do. But because someone else did, her son Andrew was revived. In an emergency, knowing what to do can literally mean the difference between life and death. That's why the Journal of Emergency Medical Services has created this emergency first aid videotape. It gives you short, simple, easy-to-follow demonstrations that anyone can learn. And it's all done in the privacy of your own home. You'll see how to handle all sorts of emergencies, from the right way to stop a nosebleed to CPR. And these quick reference reminder cards are also included for instant help when an emergency arises. Think about this. If someone in your family were choking, could you save their life? Look, we get videotapes all the time to entertain us. But no videotape we've ever taken home can even come close to the critical importance of owning this one. And it's so inexpensive, only $39.95. Is it worth it? Ask the Andreolis. Please, for your family's sake, don't put it off. Call for your first aid tape right now.
The first aid videotape is not sold or rented in any store. It's only available by calling this special number, 1-800-762-2100. When calling, use your credit card to save COD charges. So call now, 1-800-762-2100. That's 1-800-762-2100. This is a free call.
Newswatch is next on CNN. I'm Mary Alice Williams in New York. During the next 90 minutes, Lou Waters and I will have these and other stories. The president names a new right-hand man. Tennessee Republican Howard Baker is being called a hell of a choice for instant credibility with a wounded, doubting Congress. The man in line to head the CIA gives senators some double talk and leaves them wondering if he's the one for the job. Shovelers and snowplows stoop and strain against 5 feet of new fallen snow in the west, while the storm quietly smothers the back roads and mountains in a glittering hush of snow. Those stories coming up, plus a complete weather update from Flip Spiceland after this.
From psycho to drunken father, I'm Liz Wickersham. On the next Showbiz Today, we'll talk to Dennis Hopper about the film Hoosiers. Also, racer Jackie Stewart has a new home video to teach people the right way to drive. Join us at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time right here on CNN.
The big storm in the west we talked about all week long continues to make its very slow, plodding movement across the plain states now. There are winter storm watches in effect throughout the Dakotas and down into Kansas. Winter storm warnings. Check that. There are winter storm warnings in effect now. A lot of rain, too. The front's actually just about right in here. On this side of the front, rain. On this side, snow. Meanwhile, rain off the Gulf continues to cover much of the east with snow in the mountains of the Carolinas up into Virginia and West Virginia. We'll have more weather coming up a little bit later. Right now, take a look at specific forecasts for cities around the nation for tomorrow.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
The expected shakeup at the White House begins, setting aside presidential aspirations. Howard Baker, former Senate Majority Leader, takes the job vacated today by beleaguered White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan. This is Newswatch. I'm Lou Waters in Atlanta.
And I'm Mary Alice Williams in New York. The job of the 61-year-old Republican from Tennessee to restore credibility to a White House exposed as an operation out of control. For the latest, we go live to Frank Sesno at the White House. Frank?
Mary Alice, just a few moments ago it became official. Donald T. Regan submitting his resignation, a one-line resignation letter saying as starkly as the situation commanded, I hereby resign as Chief of Staff to the President of the United States. Respectfully yours, Donald T. Regan. With that, officials say, sources say, Regan stomped out. He is gone now from the White House. In his place, in comes former Majority and Minority Senate Leader Howard Baker, Republican from Tennessee, praised by the President as a distinguished American who served in the Senate, a leader of the Republican Party, and a man, says the President, of unquestioned integrity and ability. White House officials say that Baker is the kind of man who can restore instant credibility to the White House up on Capitol Hill. Some conservatives, however, are a little bit more concerned by that. At least one voices some concern from within the Republican Party that Baker may be prone to badgering by his old Senate colleagues. Nonetheless, these officials say Baker intends to surround himself with at least 3 very high-powered officials who will serve as his aides and assistants and his own right-hand men as he attempts to rebuild here at the White House. Nancy Reagan has reacted to this as well. She had wanted Regan out for months on end, and in the last week began pushing very hard, with the stories surfacing, of course, that she and Chief of Staff Regan were not even talking to one another any longer. Nancy Reagan's spokeswoman, Elaine Crispin, says that the President and Regan the President and Howard Baker are longtime friends, and Nancy Reagan says she's delighted that Baker will be joining the White House team. This is seen as the first, but certainly not the last step, as the President seeks to move out from the Tower Board report and the huge storm cloud of controversy created by the Iran arms affair and rebuild the White House staff and rejuvenate the agenda, such as it is, left for his remaining 2 years in office. It is a crucial time here at the White House. The President will be meeting with his new Chief of Staff today here at the White House. We are told that Howard Baker is due here shortly. He will not, we're told, however, be talking to reporters. But the President will be meeting with Baker and perhaps with several other, not perhaps, but certainly several other close friends and associates tonight here at the White House and throughout the weekend. At least part of this effort is going not only to looking at staffing, but looking beyond. On Wednesday night, the President will be addressing the nation from the Oval Office. He will not only be addressing the staff changes at the White House, but also some of the very serious criticisms and charges that were leveled at him, his managerial style, and his many policy decisions in the Tower Board report that was issued yesterday. First step toward rebuilding, however, a new Chief of Staff, Howard Baker. Mary Alice?
Lou Waters in Atlanta. Frank, congressional reaction is coming like machine gun fire this afternoon to the moves at the White House. Right now, California's Democratic Senator Alan Cranston's in the Senate gallery. Let's listen in what he has to say.
They served without action by the Congress for 5 months. So there's nothing wrong with a delay. He's there, he's in charge, but he's in charge at the request of the President, not confirmed by the Senate. So we are not presently responsible for approving him, and I don't think we can take that responsibility until we know all the facts about his involvement or lack of involvement in many of the unwise decisions that occurred in connection with Irangate.
With Mr. Baker going to the White House, can the president now get back on track, in your opinion?
With Howard Baker in the White House and in charge, the president should have a greater opportunity to get back on the track and to focus on first things first and to seek to cope with the many problems that confront him because they confront the country. But getting Howard Baker in charge in the White House is only one of many steps that must be taken. It's a good beginning, but there's a long way yet to go for the president, for Howard Baker, and for others who work with the president.
What other steps do you think need to be taken?
Well, more facts have to be laid out. We still don't know, by any means, all that people in the White House know about what happened. And I think there's a great responsibility to get those facts out. Howard Baker presumably will see to it that that happens to the best of his capacity, but probably there are other people still in the White House who've been involved in this affair and perhaps elsewhere in the government who should not stay very long in this administration.
Do you see Howard Baker having trouble in the White House because his views on certain policies like arms control and other things might be clearly out of line with the president?
I hope that the president will take Howard Baker's advice on some matters where they may have different views. I suspect that one problem for Howard Baker may well be that ultra-conservative forces will not really think that he is the perfect choice to be the chief of staff in the White House. But the president plainly has got to back Howard Baker, regardless of attacks on him by the far-right extremists in our country.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Good to see you.
Thank you.
How you doing?
Senator Alan Cranston of California suggesting more firings may be in order at the White House in order for the Tower Board's recommendations to be satisfied. Alan Cranston suggesting also that a problem for Howard Baker, who is the president's choice to be the new chief of staff, may be opposition by the Republican Party's ultra-conservative wing. We'll have more reaction from the Senate as it becomes available. We're also expecting shortly now a news conference by Howard Baker himself being conducted in his office. We'll be filling you in on that as soon as we have that tape available to us. Mary Alice.
And from the Vice President, George Bush now says the secret sale of arms to Iran was, quote, clearly wrong. Having read the Tower Commission report, Bush apparently agreed with its findings that the Reagan administration did indeed trade arms for hostages. Bush went on to say the policy failed the American people and it failed the president. The Vice President is the highest-ranking administration figure to publicly comment on the report so far. He is the only top administration official spared harsh criticism in the report.
Reagan out, Baker in. The shakeup generally is drawing favorable reviews on Capitol Hill. Just a short while ago, the senior Democratic senator from Baker's home state of Tennessee said